I've been a calligrapher all my life, but also an art historian, and the two have always played off each other in my career. So one of the reasons I work for Paderborn is because I have a knowledge of medieval art history, and I can understand the context of the exhibitions that they create here, and I can bring that understanding to the kind of letters, the kind of writing that they need for their installations. As an artist, it's language and the problems of language that drive me, and the way ideas get fixed in people's heads, the way a word can seem to represent an idea and therefore make the idea solid. And for me, language is not solid because I don't feel that what goes on in my head is solid. I feel that life is very fluid, that ideas can change from day to day, from year to year in your life, and language seems to hold on to those ideas, seems to make them permanent. For me, writing or text art is a way of investigating or showing the tension between what we think we know and what we do know. And also, of course, it's a process of communication. So when you see people reading things that are maybe easy to read, everybody thinks, oh, I've got it. You know, I've seen it, I've read it, I've understood it. But everybody will understand that differently. And if it's more difficult to read, then people have to search for the words, for the letters, for the words, and then for the ideas behind them. And I'm fascinated by how we can recognize letters, how we can recognize things that we only half know and put them together. Life is like listening, life is like reading. We think we understand, but we're not always so sure. I'm not sure about that, to be honest. When the texts are on the walls, like this here, of course it's in Latin, so I don't think very many visitors will know their Latin and understand it. They'll be given help on a little label next to the wall, but what it should do is create an atmosphere. In this case, it's partly an atmosphere of the past, because the letters come from the Middle Ages, but in turn those were derived from Roman letters. In part, it's of course a very contemporary thing with its color, with its very bright feeling, almost pop art sort of feeling. I can't really say if the visitor would understand something from it, but they'll feel something from it. And then from the films that I've made, they probably will be taken into the atmosphere of a certain culture at a certain time. An exhibition like this will have a lot of manuscripts, medieval manuscripts, even earlier, late antique manuscripts, and sometimes they use my calligraphy in order to give it a little extra oomph to that object. So in a few cases I've made a film that goes with the book, and the calligraphy in the film is the calligraphy in the book. It's almost like you're looking over the shoulder of the medieval writer or the Arabic writer who produced the book by hand so many centuries ago. So it's a way of actually bringing you into what the historical context was for making that manuscript. So one aspect is simply bringing the objects to life. Another aspect is to give meaning, to give context. And so I've done a calligraphy that will then be printed on large banners and hung in the exhibition space. So there you see on a larger scale what you would be seeing on a very small scale. Or I might even, in some cases, have written what was a Latin text, but in German now, in the script of the Middle Ages. So it will give you the feeling of the medieval book, but in a language you can read. The blue wall behind me represents a really interesting aspect of the exhibition in the title, Erbe der Antike, which is the white letters that you see. They are from a Fulda manuscript from the 9th century, but the writers, the monks who wrote the manuscript, had studied late Roman books in what we call square capitals, and those were based on the letters that the Romans cut in stone for their inscriptions. And this is not just a simple imitation. This is something that really understands the Roman example. So the monks that wrote that book had studied the geometry of these earlier Roman artifacts, and they'd really understood what they were looking at. As a calligrapher, I can tell you, the amazing thing is how well they understood the ancient things that they were looking at. They studied them hard, they analyzed the geometry of the letters, they looked at the technique by which the Roman inscriptions were carved in stone, and they recognized how they could transfer that into a letter written with a pen in a book. What they represent is an amazingly aware study and transferal of late Roman written culture to Germany in the 9th century. And this is something that remains a mystery to me, how they could take apart these ancient examples. There was clearly nobody with a living knowledge of this process, but they could look, they could analyze, and they could understand what had gone on about 500 years earlier. And that's what these letters are. As simple as they may seem to your eyes, they actually are a very impressive part of the handing on or the rediscovery of this antique heritage. A Brush with Silence is a performance piece that I developed actually in Bruges 15 years ago. We bring 15 calligraphers from different cultures together. So you will have a Chinese calligrapher, Japanese, Arabic calligrapher, Persian, Mongolian calligrapher, Ethiopian, whatever we can find, Latin, Greek, German, English, of course. And the calligraphers will write simple writing, nothing fancy, no fireworks, silently for the public. And when we first did this in Bruges, I thought it was about calligraphy, but the public came through and the silence was intense. Everybody was focused on watching the writers write. And then I realized what it really meant was peace and toleration in the world. And then a few years later, we also did it here in the museum itself with the calligraphers spread out through the museum. And that was absolutely wonderful. It always brings huge numbers of people. And every time the public is there in huge numbers, and every time the symbolism of this event seems to be quite clear, which is that we can live together. It's possible. And it gives people a little bit of hope that the future might be better than the present in that regard. My career has basically been run parallel with the digital revolution. So I started in the late 80s, and the people were getting their own computers by the late 80s. Photoshop was coming in the early 90s, was normal for people by the mid 90s. And other technologies appeared year after year after year, new things. And I have opened myself to that all technologies completely. The technology has allowed me to change this tradition in any number of ways. One of the ways is quite simply that I can design things, digitalize things. They can then be laser cut, they can be printed, they can be woven, anything can be done with them once I digitize the handmade design. But also, I do work on a large Wacom tablet with a stylus, and more the real calligraphy even will take place on screen. I've moved into other areas also, including performances using, for example, VR goggles. I can, for example, in my virtual space with my magic wand, I can write a word in any color, with any kind of special effects. I can walk through the word and look at it from the other side and imagine, well, what would I do to this word to make it legible from both sides? I can grab the word, I can spin it around, change the size, throw it in the air. So virtually speaking, I can take language and treat it as an object like to play with from any point of view. Now, that's something I think the next generation will have to take further. In all cultures, we've written on paper, on walls, on cloth, on anything, but it's a flat experience. A book is flat. Suddenly, a computer screen actually in many ways is just another flat surface, but not VR. Suddenly you have this chance to experience language in 3 dimensions, and I'm not really sure the human brain's going to be able to go there very easily, but I'm trying.